A sin has no meaning in my life. It doesn't matter if I sin or not because I'm under grace. No, no, no. Anyone who just sees the love of God at the cross does not understand anything about the cross.
They do not have any regard or concern for holiness, for God's law. They just want to sit back in their recliner and ponder their doctrine. That was very clear to me. It cleared it up because I could say right away in my own heart and mind, yeah, that's not me. No, that is not me.
Welcome to the Timeless Gospel Podcast, a podcast that showcases the sermons of Larry Horton, our dad. We are his daughters and your hosts.
I'm Joy.
And I'm Faith Ann. Larry was an exhorter, a true teacher, whose ministry was to proclaim the good news of the gospel and show Christians the joy and rest they can find in their Christian walk.
Each episode features a sermon followed by a discussion. Sermons end with a hymn arranged and performed by Larry's granddaughter, my daughter, Mandela.
You can find this podcast on YouTube at The Timeless Gospel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment on an episode you found edifying. You can get in touch with us at thetimelessgospel@gmail.com. That's thetimelessgospel@gmail.com.
And now, here's Larry.
We're all friends here, right? You're going to have to give me a lot of freedom this morning if we're going to understand this verse. Before we go any further, everybody read verse 9 of chapter 7. Not aloud. Let's just stop and read it to yourself. Verse 9 of chapter 7. Now, last week, we did a little bit of a survey going back to chapter 5, trying to put this whole business of the law in context, and I'm not going to do that this morning. But we ended up last week, Paul bragging on the law. He's been putting it down, so to speak, because of the sin of man. He's showed a lot of negative things concerning how the law operates. He ended last week with making a statement bragging on the law. We know that he says elsewhere in another place that the law is great if you use it lawfully. The problem with the law is that we don't use it lawfully. So he's now in the process of after making the statement in verse 8, he's now going to explain it to some degree in verse 9, 10, and 11. And in doing so, he's going to use his personal experience. So now to understand the statement that he makes in actually from 1 through 8, he now is going to give a personal experience of how this statement is true because of the way that it operates on his life. And he's going to give us the exact purpose for the law, God's holy law. And so that's going to be our purpose this morning, is to try to bring this out. I hate to admit this, but I must. I don't believe that I'm becoming liberal in my old age, but neither am I so absolute fundamental as I used to be. I don't know if that's good or bad. But now, the Reformers, they came out with this teaching that we are to take the Bible literally. Can you help me with that word? Literally? No, that's my point. Literally. Literature. We are to read the Bible, we're to accept the Bible in the exact same way that we would read any other book. And we have changed that, their thinking and their teaching concerning literally to literally. Well, if you start doing that, and please bear with me, you're going to have to give me a lot of freedom this morning. But I think if you won't turn me off, I think that we can learn something here that's very, very important to us, hopefully. But you read the Psalms as the Psalms. You read the Proverbs as the Proverbs. You read the history books as history. You read the prophecy as prophecy, and you read the doctrine as doctrine. That's what they meant by that. You read the Bible just like any other book. Well, but now here's where I get in a little bit of trouble. When I read doctrine, when you read doctrine, when we read doctrine, it's essential that we do take it literally, and that we study and look at every word, because if you miss just one word here and one word there, you're going to be off in la la land. No telling where you might end up just by a misunderstanding of this word or that word. So we must be, when we're in these doctrinal books, we must be extremely careful in how we present it and how we learn it and how we read it. But verse 9 cannot possibly be taken literally because it contradicts every other teaching of Paul. And I want to read it and look at it literally to show you what I'm talking about. That's why I need your freedom. I need a little bit of freedom here this morning with you. I'm not going liberal on you, and God is communicating something to us that we can understand here. But we cannot in any way take this literal. Your absolute fundamentalist, the people with the hairology that we looked at that time, I propose that there's no way in this world they can understand verse 9, period. We must take it relatively. And this is so important that I even want to explain relatively, even though all of you understand what that is. Relatively speaking, we have a lot of things that we talk about as relative. $1,000 to a great many people on the planet, $1,000 is an enormous amount of money. But to Mike Ditka, years ago when he was on the CBS Sunday show, NFL Today, he would fly into New York City and be at a particular coffee shop Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Him and Jerry Glanville and Jim Nance would meet for breakfast at this coffee shop in New York City. 10 o'clock Friday morning. And then he would have his different schedules from Friday to Sunday, 11 o'clock our time. And all he did he'd come to town, he would spend the time in the hotels and the restaurants and at the office, at the studio, and in the clubs. Well, Mike Ditka would come to town every single Friday morning during the football season with 50 $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band. And then he would use that money for dinner and for this and for that, whatever he might do. And at the end of the week, his rubber band was empty. He would get on his plane and he would go back home. So $1,000 to Mike Ditka wouldn't even get him through half an evening. So my point is, I'm saying that $1,000 is relative. It means something different to other people. So here, if you will grasp this, if you'll get this, you'll understand this very, very, very important verse. And it's a relative verse. Now, let's take it literally first so that no one can misunderstand and think that I'm some kind of liberal. Without even putting it in context, we start with verse 9. Paul says, I was alive once without the law. Now, that's just not true. That's an absolute contradiction to the whole Bible. Are we not born into this world dead? Isn't Paul himself tell us that in Ephesians chapter 2? That we're dead in our trespasses, we're dead in our sins. He's certainly not talking about his physical death or alive here. If he was talking about his physical death, he'd have never wrote verse 9, would have he? Because he'd have been dead. No one else could ever write verse 9 because they would be dead. No, he's talking about a spiritual life, and he calls himself, I was alive once without the law, as opposed to being dead. I was alive. That's just not true. We're born into this world dead. We all know that. We're clear on that. So that can't possibly be what Paul's talking about. Going on. I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Well, now we got what? 3 deaths? We're born dead, then we die when the law comes in, then we die again at the end of our life? Or what? That's not true either. When the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. So that you see how difficult this verse is if you take it literally? We cannot take it literally. There's no because I'm not saying it's my opinion that we shouldn't. I'm saying that it contradicts all of Paul's teaching, as you well know. You know that we're born into this world dead. Paul is saying, but he's speaking relatively here. And then going on, verse 10, and the commandment, which was to bring life, I found to bring death. Now, what we got a fourth death? Of course not. That's being That's being silly. So this morning I want to look at these verses, as relative verses. And then it all makes perfect sense. Verse 9, I was alive once without the law. That being relative. He's not talking about being dead in sin. He's not talking about salvation. He's not talking about the new birth. He's not talking about heaven. He's simply saying very clearly, and what is the subject? The subject is the law of God. The holy law of God is the subject of chapter 7 and its effect upon a Christian. And Paul says, I was alive once without the law. And we talked a little bit about this last week, in that if the law does not come in, everything is okay. All these people that Charles was talking about earlier, they're all in pretty good shape. Paul, before the law came in, that was in particular the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, relatively speaking, he was alive. He was all right. He was self-sufficient. He was self-important. He was on top of his game. He was doing well as a Pharisee. He was doing fine. He had plenty of vigor. He had plenty of power. He had plenty of self-confidence. And we know this from his own writings. As he says, I believe in Timothy, or Philippians, as to touching the law, blameless. He saw himself as a keeper of the 10 Commandments, a keeper of the law of God. And he was alive. He was fulfilled. He was self-sufficient. He had power. He was alive. That's what he's saying. I was alive once without the law. It wasn't that he didn't know the law. He was a teacher of the law. He was a teacher of the law. It's that the law did not have any effect upon him. He was still thinking concerning the letter of the law. He was still thinking that sin is an action. And as long as sin is only an action, the rich young ruler was correct when he said what he said. I can see a man going through this life without murdering anyone. And you could. I think a man could, if he really determined to, could go through this life without stealing any property, anything of value, any monies. But you can't bring the spirit of the law into it. Just the letter of the law in its actions. Paul says, before the law, touching the law, I was blameless. The rich young ruler says, talking to our Lord, said, all these things I've done from my youth. But they thought that the violation of the 10 Commandments or the violation of the law of God was an action instead of a desire, a heart problem. Paul did not understand this. He did not know that it was a heart problem, that the desires really counted. So he was alive. He wasn't a violator of God's law. He was a Pharisee. He was a moral man. He was a great man in his day. I've compared him, without going into a lot of explanation, to a young president and a great theologian and a Supreme Court justice, all wrapped up into one. That's the power this man had. That's how great he was. Maybe even to become the high priest of Israel. He was certainly on his way. Had a great zeal for God, he says. He had so much zeal, he persecuted the church of God. So he was alive. He had a life. He had influence. He had sufficiency. He had power.
For I perceive myself to be alive spiritually without the proper understanding of the law.
Well, now please tell me, where in the world did you just not come up with that? That's just amazing, Charles. Well, here, I'm thinking that I've got all this great information that I'm going to give out this morning. Charles already got it. I learned stuff from you. How come you can't learn anything from me? No, Charles, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. If you start looking at this thing literally, you go nuts. It violates every. Look at Romans chapter 3. Look at Romans chapter 1. Look at Ephesians chapter 2. All these truths violate what Paul is saying here, unless he's talking about relatively speaking. I was alive without the law. He knew the law. He taught the law, but he didn't understand the spirit of the law. The law had not grabbed hold of him yet. We're going to see this in a minute. I was alive once without the law. I don't know how come we got started so So right on time this morning. We got all kinds of time. Let's turn to Luke chapter 11. I'll show you what I mean here. Here's something that's not true either, but it seems true to the man. Luke chapter 11. Start with verse 18, which is not my point. But if Satan also is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? Because you say I cast out demons by Beelzebub. And if I cast out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore, they will be your judges. But if I cast out demons with the finger of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you. Now, when a strong man, this is an evil man. This could be Satan. But this is an evil man Jesus is talking about. When a strong, and most I would think that this is Satan, but when a strong man, fully armed, guards his own palace, his goods are in peace. That's what Paul is saying, that there was a time in his life when everything was just fine. He loved God, he thought. He was religion. He was religious, absolutely. He was an obedient to the law of God, absolutely. His life was going well. He had great power and all these things. He was alive. Just like the man thinks that his goods are in peace. When a strong man, fully armed, but it's not true, but that's the way it looks. Guards his own palace, his goods are in peace, but when a stronger than he comes upon him and overcomes him, he takes from him all his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoils. So the man is he's just not clear. He lives he's just not living the truth. It's not true that his goods are in peace. Stronger man comes and takes them away. But it would seem that way. So Paul says in verse 9 of chapter 7, I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Now, the commandment here is, I believe, and you can disagree, but there's no need to, back to what's been said earlier, is the 10th commandment, because that's the one that gets you. The rest of them you can kind of do, on the surface and kind of practice. But the 10th one you can't. The 10th one is a heart thing. The 10th one is an inward thing. And the commandment came in, thou shalt not covet. And covet means to desire anything forbidden. So if you desire anything that is forbidden, and that commandment came in, and it came in by the grace of God, it came in by the power of God, it came in by the Holy Spirit of God, and therefore it overwhelmed Paul, in that he saw for the first time that his sinfulness, and that's what this lesson's about today, sinfulness. He wasn't a sinner before. And everybody around us, the law of God has never had any effect upon them, and they're not sinners. I mean, they know that they sin, but it has no real meaning in their lives. Therefore, the law has not come into their life. The law has no effect. Yes, they know that they don't do as well as they should. And Paul would agree with that. Paul would say, I've always been a sinner in the fact that I don't do as well as I could, but it was never a real issue until the holy law of God came in and ministered to Paul, thou shalt not covet. And at that point, Paul died, as opposed to being alive. It's still relative. It doesn't mean he died naturally, and it doesn't even mean he died spiritually. He died relative. Relative to what? Relative to being alive. So what the law of God does, according to the Apostle Paul in verse 9, is that everything is fine and wonderful, and you're a moral person, you're a good guy, and the law comes in, and instead of being alive, now you die. What's our fellow's name that's got the tapes back there? Mark Keeler. I was watching another one of his programs on TV. Boy, this guy is absolutely terrific. Anytime you get to see him, do it. I guess maybe the only person on TV that's worth watching. Just wonderful stuff. But one of his compadres was out on the beach, and he was going down through the beach talking to different people, and he was talking about the 10 Commandments. Got hold of this one young man, and you could see the transformation right in front of this young man's eyes. He's 20, 22, 23. And he asked him, did he know the Ten Commandments? And he said, yes, I know the Ten Commandments. He says, do you live by the Ten Commandments? He said, yes, I live by the Ten Commandments. And he said, okay, have you ever stolen? And the man says, no, I've never stolen. And he said, well, now, we're not talking about material. We're not talking about the price of something. We're not talking about the value. God is not talking about the value of anything here. He's talking about the act of stealing. Have you ever stolen even a piece of gum? And the young man says, well, yeah, I've done that. So then he went on, and you could just see this young man in his face. You could just see him deteriorating. He was so cocky. When they first started the interview. And he said, well, have you ever committed adultery? No, oh, no. But the young man wanted to tell this reporter type guy all of his conquest, But he said, no, he hadn't done that. But then when he got a little bit more specific, well, he'd done that every day. He's proud of it. And you could just see the young man's, that's the effect of the law. Now, this was a matter of this man and that young man and a verbal, mental thing. But if when the Holy Spirit will use that holy law of God in your life and in mine, there's great transformation. And we come from being alive to being dead. That's what Paul is saying here. And the only way that can happen is through the holy law of God. There's no other way. Think about the Pharisees. Now, everyone here has some kind of thought about the Pharisees in his mind, her mind. But you're wrong about that in this regard, in this much. Pharisees were wonderful people. That one Pharisee on the corner that was praying, he wasn't like that other guy. He wasn't. He was telling the truth. He said he fasted twice a week. He did. He was telling the truth. He said he gave 10% of his money to the poor. He did. The Pharisees were the finest moral people that you could find. They taught the law of God. They taught the scriptures that they had at that time. They were the preachers. They were the theologians. But every one of you, when I said think of the Pharisees, you had some kind of negative thought. And the reason you had this negative thought is because of Jesus Christ. You never ever notice how awful and mean and corrupt and sinful and evil the Pharisees were until they came across Jesus Christ. And then it was because of Him that we see their evilness and their sinfulness. They were alive until Jesus got a hold of them. And then they turned into backbiters. They turned into evildoers. They turned into evil planners. They turned into schemers. They turned into killers. All because of what? Because of one man. That's what the law of God does. The law of Moses, the moral law of the Old Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, all of these things. Jesus Christ Himself. Jesus Christ Himself. Once the Holy Spirit ministers this, it will affect a person. And when the commandment came in, Paul died. He was alive, but the commandment came in, thou shalt not covet, and that commandment was real and powerful in his life, and so Paul died. And that's a big part of the law of God. But it gets worse. Verse 9, I was alive once without the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the commandment, which was to bring life. Now we got another contradiction. And the commandment, which was to bring life, I found to bring death. Well, Larry, is that saying then that by obeying the commandments, is that saying then, I can't say it that way because that would be right. Is that saying then that the holy law of God, the Ten Commandments, the moral law of God, that brings about life? I thought Paul taught just the opposite. Well, yes and no. Turn to Exodus chapter 19. It says, now, therefore, if. That's the problem. If you will obey. The commandment will bring about life if you obey it. If you obey. If you obey the commandment, whatever commandment it is, it can bring about, it can't, but its purpose There's no negative, there's no minus to the commandment itself. And if you would obey it, you would have life. That's what Paul means there by that commandment that was to bring about life. It would bring about life if you would obey it. I know that this is some of you guys' favorite, one of your favorite hymns. I've had a problem with it. I've gotten into arguments my whole life. But if the writer would have just have written, if you trust and obey. If you trust and obey. There's no other way to be happy in Jesus than if you trust and obey. That's absolutely correct. But the problem, which is the lesson this morning, is the sin that's in your life. You cannot obey. You cannot obey. And there is this thing, been around for years, is the idea that responsibility equals ability. And you are responsible. Every single one of us is responsible to obey every single word in the Bible that God tells us to do, whatever it may be, or not to do. But we do not have the ability. They say God would never tell us to do something that we cannot do, and that's exactly what God does through His law. Walk before me and be ye blameless is the standard. So if you trust and obey, you will be happy in Jesus, because those commandments obeyed perfectly would bring life. That's what Paul's saying. Verse 10, and the commandment which was to bring life, I found to bring death. Jesus said, you can sum up the whole law. More using my words, but Jesus said, you can sum up the whole law. And love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, neighbors yourself. Is that not the whole law? Of course it is. Poor old Luther, he was in that monastery just trying his best, going to confession for 4 hours every day. The priest thought that Luther was lazy, that by going to confession, he wouldn't have to work. And so he spent 4 hours every morning confessing all of his sins for the previous 20 hours. Finally, the old father, the old priest, the old Luther's mentor, whatever, he finally said, Martin, look, all you got to do is love God. And Luther said, love Him? I hate Him. God is a monster. That's what the law of God will do to a man. The very thing that's to bring about life brings about death, relatively speaking. Now, verse 10, and the commandment which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, here's the culprit. It's not the law of God. It's not the Ten Commandments. It's not the Old Testament. The culprit is sin. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, and Mark, we had a small discussion about this last week. Taking occasion by the commandment deceived me, and by it killed me. Sin is the problem. Did you know that outside of God, except for God, that sin is the most powerful thing in the universe? Your sin. You can't control it. You're pitiful. Did you realize just how powerful sin is? Sin is so powerful that we just found out last week that it uses the law of God as its base of operations. You and I are going to get along famously as long as you never tell me no. But the minute you tell me no, I'm going to react because I'm sinful. That's the problem. And the base of sin's operation is the law of God. There's great power. Sin has great power. You buy a brand new car, a brand new one, and you turn on the engine, and you got the windows rolled up, and there you sit in that brand new car. It's not vibrating in any way, and you can't hear the engine. It would seem like it's lifeless. It would seem like it has no power at all. It's just, am I not correct in that? It just, you can't hear the engine, and it seems like you're sitting in your easy chair at home. But put your foot on the Footfeet, and you'll see the power of that car. That's the way sin is. It's lying dormant. Yeah, I know. All of us, all you guys are a whole lot better than average. I know that. I'm better than average. I know that. But the law comes in and puts its foot on the Footfeet. And here comes sin. Here comes sin exploding because of the law. What would you think of a fellow that was a Calvinist who understood justification by faith, who taught the Bible a little bit, and could defend justification by faith? He knew what he believed and why he believed it, had a family, loved his kids loved him, loved his wife loved him. They had a little meeting, his house, and all of a sudden, because somebody just pricked his pride a little bit, absolutely exploded and just went plumb off the air. And it scared everybody in the room with his madness. Everybody in the room was scared to death. His daughters were crying because of his outrage. Well, what do you think about a guy like that? Maybe he's not a Christian. The man would think, oh, that was wrong of me. I'm sorry, and I'm not going to ever do that again. Well, he never wanted to do it the first time, right? What's the poor purpose of blowing up and just causing people to cry and get fearful? Oh Lord, I'm sorry, and I'm not going to do that again. That's not the use of the law. And besides that, that's not to show the sinfulness of who the man is. He was perfectly sinful, as much so as he's ever been before or after he became a Christian. Sin is awful. Sin is terrible, and it's so deceiving. It is so deceiving. A man is just full of sin, thinking he's out working for God. Paul did that. Obedient to the Ten Commandments. Teacher of the Ten Commandments, and yet he was so deceived by his own sinfulness. He thought he was alive, had all this power. And the commandment which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. Now, we'll end this little lesson with the question: how does sin deceive you? I've got 4 or 5 different answers. Look here. In the commandment which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, the law. Sin uses the law, the Ten Commandments. Sin uses the law, thou shalt not kill, as its base of operations. And by that, what did I say? Thou shalt not kill or steal. Kill. You will go out and be more of a killer than you ever were. In the spirit of the law, which is you can't get mad, can't get angry at folks, can't call them foolish. Or let's just use what Paul used, coveting. Don't covet. Just don't covet. Now, you cannot desire. I'm not saying that don't go out and steal it, because you won't do that. I know you won't do that. You won't go out and steal the thing that you want. But you can't even desire it if it's forbidden to you. So now don't do that. Sin, you're so sinful. Sin is such great power in your life that by the very commandment, don't covet, it's going to create in you coveting of every kind. Now, there is a way, fortunately, out of this mess, but it's not this morning. That's not the point. The point is that we're sinful. How does sin, what would you might think? I thought about this for years and didn't have an answer, so don't feel like you don't feel like you shouldn't. How does sin deceive us through the commandments? I can think of 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. Would anybody like to give me an answer? Joy?
Try to change it a little bit, bring it down to where we think obey it.
It's excellent. It's excellent. That's excellent. All those folks who are alive right now, because the law hasn't come into their lives yet, the moralists of our day, all the moral people, that's what they've done. They've got it down there where they can do it, and then they practice doing it. They do a pretty good job of doing it. I went to church one time and heard it was on Mother's Day, and he taught on how there isn't a Wives' Day, but he ended up talking about the wives. No, he talked about husbands love your wives. That's what it was. As Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. But he didn't say much about Christ as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. He said we ought to love our wives, and said now today, to show your love to your wife, you need to go out and open the car door for her. Well, I could do that. So thank you, Joy. Yeah, Bob?
Make somebody who's wanted to elect doubt their election.
Well, now you've got the whole Puritan movement. You're exactly right. The whole Puritan movement. There was a young man. I've got time, guys. There was a young man. His Jonathan Edwards' future son-in-law, but his daughter died, so he didn't marry her, of course. His name was Brainerd. David Brainerd was a missionary to the New York Indians, and he literally worked himself to death for God. And he wrote a journal. And this was not unique with Brainerd in his thinking, but if you read that journal, on every page he's talking about, oh, I'm so awful, and God, I don't know why you don't strike me dead. Right now I'm so sinful, because he didn't know what to do with it. Now the law was working well. The law was doing its job, but from what Bob said, he didn't understand where we're going with this lesson, and that's what to do with the sin once we find it. But his life was miserable. Just miserable, because he thought he could obey the laws of God. He thought that the law of God was his sanctification. And as we've said here, and as we'll continue to say, I really like saying it till somebody stops me from saying it. We're not, because everyone knows we're not justified by the law. But I say as loud as I possibly can, we're not sanctified by the law either. The law can no more sanctify than it can justify. Any other way, Charles?
Well, I think it could be the same thing as the scripture says, for us to be aware of the deceitfulness of riches.
Okay.
Because the deceitfulness of riches is that essentially it makes us self-sufficient, and that we then, you see, are able to handle all of life's problems because I have these riches. Actually, sin does the same thing. By taking the law, so if I can follow the law, then I have arrived and I am righteous before God because of what I did. And therefore it deceives us thinking that we have this right relationship because of something that I've achieved.
And we have not had this conversation. We have, in our whole life, we've never had this conversation. We've never talked about this. But the answer that I came up with is that sin, I am so sinful, it deceives me into the fact that of me thinking that I can obey God's law. I think that's what Charles just said. And we've never talked about this. Sin is so deceitful. Thou shalt not covet. Okay, God, I won't covet. And then I go on. Another way that sin deceives us is this awful, terrible word, antinomianism, that I'm accused of from time to time, and rightfully so, because a grace teacher should be accused of that from time to time. It's just not true. But the antinomianist, the sin in his life, he wants nothing to do with the law of God. He wants nothing to do with the holiness of God. He wants nothing to do with morality. All he wants to do is sit back and think about his doctrine and think about justification by faith. But he doesn't understand justification by faith, or it would move him to live correctly. Because God does not save us out from our sins without saving us out of our sins. So his life is going to be moving and changing and growing. And he's becoming more and more, let's just use the language, what God would want him to be as his father. But the antinomianist aspect says, oh, no. I'm under grace. I'm under grace. Where sin abound, grace does much more abound. A sin has no meaning in my life. It doesn't matter if I sin or not because I'm under grace. No. Anyone who just sees the love of God at the cross does not understand anything about the cross. That's just half of it. They only know half the truth. And a half-truth is a lie. And if all you see at the cross is the love of God, you have no understanding of what the cross is about. The cross is about sin. The cross is what God had to do with His Son because of your sin. And sin will take advantage of you, and sin will deceive you. And it does it through the commandments. So the commandments come in, and you water them down. You get all worked up over them, Bob, or you think you can do them. And so then we teach morality. The culture teaches morality. You got to be moral. You got to be moral. And the more morality we teach and preach, the more corrupt we become. We talked about our graft a few weeks ago. Our convicts. We're trying to decriminalize criminals. That you can't reform a criminal. We send them to prison to reform them. We send them to prison to rehabilitate them. You cannot rehabilitate and reform a sinner. Only the gospel can do that. So the law of God is not the problem. It's the sin in our lives that's the problem. But Paul is walking us through this. He's been putting down the law. He's been putting down the law. He's been putting down the law for 2 chapters now. He talks about the grace of God, the love of God, but now he's going to put it all in perspective. And he's going to show that the holy law of God is not in any way, shape, or form a culprit of anything. It is the sin that's within us that the Bible calls sin, that inward working, awful, corrupt being that you and I are. We take that law of God, the law of God comes into our life, and we sin more and more and more.
Welcome to the discussion portion of this episode. We are your hosts. I'm Joy.
And I'm Faith Ann.
And we are Larry's daughters.
And we have good news. And Joy, you know what I have brought with me today?
What?
For this recording? I have notes. So you were giving me a hard time a few episodes ago that I don't ever take notes or I don't have notes, but I have notes today because chapter 7 is no not to be messed around with, right?
Right.
You kind of need notes.
Yes. It's intricate. Listener, we'd like to divide the discussion portion up into 3 parts. We start with highlights from the sermon, then we move into where we go wrong, and finally we end up with what the sermon taught us.
Joy, what was your first highlight?
Well, my highlight, and I just have one, but it fits into the highlight portion. It also fits into the where we go wrong portion. So I'll just say a little bit about this now in the highlight, and then I'll probably repeat some things in the where we go wrong. So for me, when Larry gets to talking about antinomian and what that means, for me that was such a highlight, and I think really special, if that's the right word. It's more than special. It was deeply helpful for me at this time as I am still trying to work through this law and grace and what is the place of the law? Where is the place of the law then for the believer in the new covenant? And I think I know that, and in my mind, I think I have that down, but it can be hard to explain. And I think, in my whole Christian life, for sure, I have not explained it the best I could, or maybe I have even been wrong. Sometimes in the way I explain it. So he just said it so well, explaining what antinomianism is. And even though he's kind of happy that he's been accused of that, because that, like we've said before, Faith Ann, in other episodes, that means that we are preaching, we are teaching grace so strongly and fully and completely. We are teaching, we are talking about grace, the word grace, in the correct way. We are talking about it as all that grace is, and it is, and there's no but to that.
Right.
So we're teaching it that strong to cause people to wonder if we are an antinomian. And I think Dad's explanation of what an antinomian is was very helpful to me. I had a general idea about what that meant. But when he explains it as an antinomian is, they do not have any regard or concern for holiness, for God's law. They just want to sit back in their recliner and ponder their doctrine. And so that was very clear to me. It cleared it up because it was very clear to know, for me to know in my heart, that's not confusing, because I could say right away in my own, heart and mind, yeah, that's not me. No, that is not me.
Yeah.
For me to even have that thought or to say out loud that I don't care, I have no regard for holiness or God's law or anything, no, that is not me. So it was just that whole section when he's talking about antinomian, and when he talks about if you are looking at the cross and all you see is love, like you just see God's love, and that's all you know. That's all you know about the cross is God's love. Then you don't even know the half of it. I just think Larry did a beautiful job of of upholding, I'll get into that later, but a beautiful job of honoring and recognizing God's law. Recognizing God's law even for the believer.
Yeah, and the benefit that it does have for us
Right.
if we look at it correctly. And the cross was a magnificent reconciliation. I mean,
Right.
there was a divide, there was a problem, a vast problem, and the cross reconciled God's people to himself. They were not doing well before the cross, and that's the great joy and truth of the cross, is this reconciliation. And it's not just love, like you said. We were enemies. We were
Right.
we were war with God, and God reconciled us to himself in a way that we could never even we don't take any part in.
Yeah, right.
Yes, this law business is very tricky,
Yes.
and it's not tricky for most because they don't press the grace in. They don't lean into the grace, and so then there's no need to kind of clarify the law's place for the Christian, because everyone else
Yes.
thinks that knows exactly what the law's place for the Christian. Help you get better.
Right.
But when it's not that, we do have to kind of narrow in, well, what is it then?
Right.
And you're right, he does a good job.
Right. Yes. So, what was your highlight?
Well, before I say my highlight, I wanted to tell the listeners how this tape may have had a little bit of a different feel because it was from 2003. We had two lessons about the law. We had one from 1988, and then we had one from 2003. And Joy and I both felt that Larry did a better job of explaining the law in the later sermon. So some of the people that you hear, are from that New Covenant church where he pastored, and where Joy and I and many of the listeners and many of, some of the guests now attend. So if it was a little confusing because it didn't sound quite like they normally have been, that's why. It's from 2003. So my highlight was when you answered one of the questions. Were you able to hear yourself, what you said?
Yeah. Yeah. I was able to hear myself. I'll try to save this for what we've learned. Try to save that because I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'll just I guess I could give a little teaser by saying my comment in that it sure sounded like I knew what I was talking about.
Well, yeah.
But without getting too ahead of ourselves, I'll just say that whole lesson, Larry's whole lesson on what Paul meant when he is saying I was alive, but then the law came in and I died. Well, that was going to be the part where I was going to talk about what we've learned, because I have always been confused by that. I mean, even lately, even recently, as I read through that, I'm like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. I don't get it, because we know Romans 6 so well. Mm-hmm. And, being died, it was just always been confusing. So when I heard, I was in that lesson. So I heard him go through this. So I don't know why I've forgotten it all. And I've just always been confused. But we can get to that later. But cool. Okay.
Yeah, and then one more quick highlight. I I really liked what he said about how you don't realize you think your house is strong until a stronger man comes in. That was really good. You think that you think you've got it together until somebody better and stronger shows you, oh, I don't have it together. And I have a quick story. So many years ago, we had two cats. We still do, but they're different cats. uh, that we left the house for a few days, and I can't remember where we went, all of us. And we came back, and we started noticing fleas. Those darn fleas were awful. They were awful. I liken it to how Larry said, you think something is just surface, and then you realize, oh, it's like when the Holy Spirit shows you what the law really is, and then you don't realize the depths of this problem. And that flea problem was for months. We were struggling, and then our neighbor told us how to get rid of them, and it in the all natural way, where you didn't have to hire anybody to come in and spray the house. In the second example, like when your car breaks down. So you say, okay, I'm going to this needs to go to the shop. And it doesn't occur to you right away how reaching that thing is going to be. Like, you're only thinking about, okay, well, the next thing on my calendar, today, I'm going to have to figure out how to reschedule that. But then you realize, oh my gosh, all these things need to be rescheduled. How am I going to get married here and husband here and dog here? And I think that's kind of what this is. It's this, you think if you're using one standard by the letter of the law, you're okay.
Right.
Thou shalt not steal is okay. So in the car analogy, I got to take my car to the shop. Okay, I can handle this one thing that I have to reschedule. But thou shalt not covet is, no, the entire week is screwed. The entire week's messed up. Because you can not steal, but can you not covet? Are you capable of doing that? Well, you're not. And that law is not. It has that aspect to it of showing us that we can't fulfill the spirit of it in our own doing, in our flesh.
Right. And then at the same time, in the new creation, that's working too. Like, and I think we've talked about this before. We talked about it at our lunch with some ladies, that the things that come out of the new creation in us are typically things that, this is very hard to explain, that are not coming from a place of us looking at the law and saying, I will do that. I'm going to go do that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look to the law and think, yes, that's the way, that is the correct way of living. I'm not saying that. But typically, I think what comes out of the new creation, because we do need to see in some form the working. I think God allows us to see the work he's doing in the new creation. So I think we just find ourselves in some areas, because we're not perfect. We're sinful. So it's not going to be in all areas all the time, but in some areas. For instance, the when Dad explains in this lesson, thou shalt not kill. Okay, I can do that. You could probably not murder somebody. But have you ever gotten angry? Ever? And will you ever get angry? Yeah. But I think that in the new creation, the new creation does not sin, for one. So there are times that maybe we would have gotten angry, but we just don't.
Yeah.
We just and it's almost like it's like out of our out of our power, you know?
For sure. For sure. Yeah, it's divine.
Yeah.
And then you tread that line, don't you, Joy, all the time
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
not being prideful, about the changes that have
Mhm.
happened in your life. It's just this balancing
Yeah.
act.
Yeah, you're right. But I do think that what your point is excellent. It's the getting down to the very, very root and core of a law that we think we can keep. The murder one is kind of easy, the thou shalt not kill, but to get angry really is at the heart of that. So that's very clear. Okay, well, that commandment, we can't say we've lived up to that commandment, perfectly, or even lived up to it if it's about anger. But the one I think about often is the stealing one, because of Larry in our childhood was so thorough about explaining what stealing is. So we just grew up with the understanding that walking into a store and taking a piece of fruit, and stealing it really is like, I don't know, it's one form of stealing. The thing that always sticks out to me is the stealing of people's time. And I don't know if he said this, but I kind of added to this, I think, maybe later, and that is stealing other people's glory.
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah, stealing the recognition that rightfully belongs to others.
We do that all the time.
Yeah, how often, even in conversations, yes, we're just socially so selfish.
Yes.
Oh, we're awful. We are awful if we really
Mm-hmm.
thought about it. But the only thing that saves us socially is that we're kind of all equally awful. So we don't
Yeah. Right.
get banned from the clubs because we're all in the same boat. Well, I agree. I agree. There's utility in the law, and there is good that can come from reflecting on how you're not wallowing in those the outward sins that are such havoc wreaking sins. It's good to reflect on that and be thankful for that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about where we go wrong.
For this where we go wrong, I think you could agree, Faith Ann, that in all of our where we go wrong sections that we've done so far, it always, and rightfully so, but we're always kind of pointing toward the legalist, and I mean, rightfully so, because people are under that bondage and they need to be freed of that. That is so important. But I don't think so far that we have turned that in a different direction, the where we go wrong. So I think I want to spin this one, and I only have one. I'm gonna point it toward the antinomian because I do think it's important, and I don't want to be. I mean, I don't think I am, but even in my speech or what I present to other people, I don't want to be the one who disregards or ignores the second half. There's always a second half. There's a second half in Romans. There's a second half in Ephesians. It's just that the second half does not change the first half. It does not change the settledness of the first half. What I mean by that is the second half of Ephesians in the instructions on how women are to be, how men are to be, how the church is to be, how children are to be, it doesn't change your justification. It doesn't change your, in one of the ways of sanctification. It doesn't change that. It doesn't change where you are, where you've been placed. But I'm going to turn my attention now to the antinomian or even the dear people, that the grace people, and we're starting to become aware more and more, thanks to the internet, that there are other people out there, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear other people talk about identification truths and not being under the law, but under grace, and what that means. It's wonderful. But I think that on the last episode, I made a comment to say, when these people say, therefore, we have no relationship to the law, we don't need the law, we have something else. We have a new and living way that has nothing to do with the law. In the last episode, I said, when people say that, we're still trying to figure out, do we agree with that? Well, now I'm going to be confident and say, no, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that statement. But I don't think that is a matter of taking grace too far, or taking the word grace too far. Grace is what it is. It is God doing something completely of his own. I could just end it there. Like, that's what grace is. So I don't think for a person or group of people to say, therefore we don't need the law, I still wouldn't say that is a matter of taking grace too far. I would just say that's just incorrect thinking. You are just coming up with a conclusion that's not right.
Yeah. Because if you think about the letters that Paul's writing to these Christian churches, these Christians in these different cities, he would not include chapters and chapters of irrelevant instruction. If it's irrelevant, why would he write it?
Right. So just the last thing that I'll say about that is, just yesterday, in kind of the midst of constant conversation, wonderful conversations with my husband Daniel, wonderful conversations with my sisters, my sisters in Christ, having lunches and talking these things out, this subject of the place for law. Just yesterday, I listened to an 1.5-hour sermon of Jeff Durbin, a sermon titled, "Is the Law for Today?" It's something like that, and we're going to include it in the show notes because it is excellent. For me, I mean, as far as this time in my life, now I don't know, 6 months from now, I may have more questions, but for me, it's pretty much settled. It's like settled in my mind. I guess I'm calmed down, I think, about this question of, well, what is the place then? So, for anybody that's listening, it would be great to listen to. I think I was very, very helped by it. The whole 1.5 hours of him talking is very clarifying. It's wonderful. But for me, kind of the highlight of it, or the thing that just kind of reached out to me, was he was saying how when his people were out at an abortion clinic, and anybody that knows about Jeff Durbin, that they go out to abortion clinics, and they have big posters, I think, depicting, murder, depicting the murder of babies. They were at a table, and they were saying things. They were trying to speak to a woman who was about to get an abortion and trying to plead with her not to do this. And they were using language like, basically, if I could paraphrase, repent, like, woman, do not murder your child. Like, come to the Lord. The Lord says, do not murder. God says, do not murder. And he said that Another woman, a so-called Christian woman, a woman who claimed to be a Christian, came up to them and like scolded Jeff Durbin and the group by saying, "This isn't right. You guys are preaching law. You're not preaching grace." And that really was just a kind of a light shined on the whole issue for me. You know, how ridiculous, how absurd for someone claiming to be a Christian to rebuke them for not just trying to nicely, sweetly, "Oh, you know, we'll give you a house to live in, hun. Well, whatever you need so that you don't do this. This isn't really good." No, they were like, "You're about to murder, like, God have mercy on your soul," basically.
Right.
"We will help you, you know, what do you need in order not to do this? But repent. Do not do this." It shed light on the whole thing for me, and it also, I don't know if convicted is the right word. It convicted me a little bit because it caused me to kind of look within, which is okay sometimes to do. It made me think, yeah, you know what? That's what I do when I look at the world doing these things. And if I said something else that I wanted to use as an example, we might get, quote, canceled. I don't know if I can say it, you know, like, but recent events, just in your face, you know, out of the pit of hell, evil type things just being promoted. Why do I get to point at that and say, you know, I'm using God's law to say, God have mercy on their souls. That is disgusting. But yet, like, it would be wrong for me to think, but, you know, I don't have to worry about that because I'm under grace. I'm not under law. So I guess to sum up, you know, that's where we can go wrong. We know that the law has nothing to do with our justification. It doesn't cause justification or sanctification.
Yeah, it's not the tool that's used for justification or sanctification to improve. Even if that mother who was about to walk into the abortion clinic was a Christian, which would be a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
But you would certainly want her told, please don't do this, repent, even if she was a Christian.
Right. That's a great point, Faith Ann. I'm sorry. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And one thing that Jeff Durbin is really good at explaining is that the repentance that the mother she needs that because she's going to feel the guilt regardless. So after the act, the only thing that's going to give her any relief and peace is to say to her, yes, this is what you did. Repent. There's grace for you at the cross. But to not tell her that what she did was wrong, you're not doing her any favors because her conscience is going to tell her that what she did was
Beautiful.
horrible.
Yes, I'm so glad you finished that thought out for me because that's perfect.
Well, I want to tell my piano story.
Yeah. What is this piano story?
Okay, so and you'll know it as soon as I start talking. You'll be like, "Oh yeah,
Okay.
I remember that." This was the car. Larry likes to use car analogies, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So he's talking about the engine that just is idle until you put he said your foot on the Footfeet.
On the Footfeet. I loved that. The Footfeet.
Yeah. And then we see the power. So where I go wrong is I think that because I don't blow up all the time, when the jar of jelly doesn't open or when the door doesn't open for me or when the flat tire, you know, because I'm not generally a person that has a short temper.
Mm-hmm.
I can sometimes fool myself into thinking that I don't have an anger problem, but I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for me to know that I have an anger problem.
I'm not laughing because, like, that's what I think. I'm not laughing like, oh yeah, she really does have it. I'm not laughing at all. Like, I wouldn't categorize that, but you know yourself, so we'll just go with that.
Okay, so my daughter plays piano and she participates in contests, various contests. And the people that participate in these contests are of the evangelical sort. So we're a lot of dressing up, a lot of
Oh, I
little
know this one. I know this one. Okay. Yeah.
a lot of bow ties for the little 10-year-olds and dresses and denim jumpers occasionally, and they're evangelical. So my daughter was invited to play her piece, a piece she worked really hard on, a very complicated classical piece at OU in Norman. This was a few years ago. And you don't get invited to this particular contest unless you first can achieve a certain score at a different contest. Like, it was a state thing. So we're down there. We're about to go in, and the college was also on the very same day having their graduation in the same building for their music college. That was their graduation day, but somehow they scheduled this contest on the same day. So we're walking in, and there's this security guard, and the security guard is hot. He is hot. He is trying to set up the metal detectors. It never occurred to me that those would have to be built, but they're in like little pieces, and you got to set them up.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not happy that all these people were coming in. And he was rude. He was extremely rude. And you can't come in here. You can't come in. I don't have this set up yet. And I'm like, but she has a time, it's going to back up the entire process. I don't want to be here for all day. She has a time that she's supposed to play. And so I had words with the security guard, but that's not where the anger emerged. Not with him. But so what we ended up doing, there were a group of us, and we're just fussing at each other. And he goes off to go get another part of his security thing, the metal detector. He goes off to go get another piece and bring it back, and we all just go. When he leaves, we just go.
Yeah.
But I'm hot. So I walk up to the check-in table, and you have the nice girls, they're probably 16 years old in their dresses, and they're the ones that you talk to, and they tell you what room you're supposed to go and wait. And I say, you're going to have a lot of people late to their times because there's a security guard out there, and he's acting like a real, and I said stick, but I didn't use the ST. I used a different word. And her poor little face, she's okay. And so we go and we play, and then I calm down, and my daughter was thoroughly embarrassed at my behavior.
Oh, I've never done that.
And so I come back and I walk up, and I'm still in my mind. I'm still thinking, I have this arrogance about me. And I think, I should probably apologize to this girl. Almost like a, hey, I'm sorry, but more of a prideful, like, yeah, that was pretty cute, wasn't it? That I used this phrase, and like I'm a big shot. Yeah. Well, I go up to her and I lean in and I said, I apologize for my language earlier. And she just looked at me and she said, thank you. And I was like, oh, ooh, I did a number on that poor girl. For no reason at all. It was not her fault. And I took that anger and I just transferred it from the dope that wouldn't let me in, and I just heaped it out onto her for no reason. But that sin, that was laying dormant in me, and it just came out because how dare you tell me that I can't come in here? I was invited. Yeah. My daughter was invited. So that's, you got to be careful. I mean, you don't have to be careful, but it's not good to not recognize that we still have that flesh, and it's not going to go away.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Not that I'm trying to steal your glory with your story, but man, I have like almost the same exact story. I'll make it quick. You're so right. When my kids were younger, I could tell lots of stories where they've been embarrassed, especially at the bank, like we've said before. Yeah, there's bank stories. Whether that's inside the bank or through the drive-through, it doesn't matter. I get hot hot at the bank for whatever reason. But yeah, during those years, I think I'm a little better. But I mean, everybody knows like Joy's eyeballs, and when Joy comes out to take care of business, she takes care of business. Well, I'm in the parking lot of Walmart, and I can't remember who all was what kids, but they're small, not babies, but small enough where I have to hold their hands, and I'm walking out through the parking lot between cars almost to get to my car. And this car just starts backing out like it was going to hit us. It was backing out kind of slow, but it was just backing out, and it was just it was coming. And so I yell, and I don't remember what I yelled. I may have cussed, I don't know, just like, hey, and it just fits right in. I mean, of course, a little different because we were about to get hit by a car, but it's still in that same category that you had. It wasn't about protecting my life. She was going too slow to actually cause any damage. It was more, how dare you, or you stupid driver, you are so stupid. I can't believe people are so stupid that just back out and don't look around. And this is my kid that you're about, this is, how dare you, all this really bad thinking. And so the car stops, of course, but then as I'm walking off, she manages to come all the way out, and I hear this soft, ma'am, and I go back with the kids. It's an old lady, like a really old lady, and she's got tears in her eyes.
Oh.
And she looks down. She is heartbroken, and I just, of course, I mean, I have enough sense to like, oh, huh, like, no, ma'am, it's fine. And she just couldn't hardly talk. And she said, the little ones, oh, oh, I would just, oh, I would never want to hurt the little ones. And I mean, I did the best I could, but I mean, I'm sure she's glad that I stopped her from, hitting us. But it was, the way I did it was really, really bad.
Yeah. I remember we actually went to a conference to hear Mike speak. This was a long time ago too. The kids were young. Remember, you went with us, and it was at an Embassy Suites, and I got really mad because the pool was going to be closed. And I remember Mom saying, Faith Ann, and I didn't process like, oh, I'm making other people feel embarrassed to be around me because I was so mad that they were not going to have the pool open, and I got all these little kids. What am I going to do with these little kids if they can't swim? And which is a valid way to think about, but not so much that you're making other people wish that you weren't around.
Right.
That's not the way to do it.
Yeah. It's purely selfish. I mean, that's something that I've always put on my kids, and then I don't follow it myself. I mean, I have made that important to put it on my kids, as far as, man, you guys think you are so cute. One time I had finally had enough, and I told these kids, I said, yeah, you guys think you're having a ball by acting like, you can't stand each other, and who can come up on the top of who, and who's the smartest, and you guys are just having a great time. But nobody else likes it. Nobody. Everybody else is having a bad time when they're around that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go and do the same thing.
And we go do the same thing. Yeah. All right. I want you to talk about your blog.
Okay. As I said before in this episode lately, I've been struggling with being confident in how I talk about grace. And during this struggle, I kind of had a moment of humility. Oh, aren't I humble? I know you can't really say that you're like, you can't give yourself a compliment on being humble. I get it. But
Mhm.
I basically ended up saying something to the effect to my husband of, should I even be writing about grace? Should I be talking about grace? Should I be like, cuz I don't know that I fully understand grace. I don't know that I should be writing about grace or talking about grace. And he said something very, very truthful and sweet. And he said, "Well, Joy," he said, I think what you're saying is you think that you're not qualified." I said, "Right." And he said, "Well, you're not. But I don't know anyone who is. I don't know anyone who is qualified to speak on this grace, because we don't understand. We don't understand just how good God is."
Mhm.
And then, of course, he said, "That doesn't mean you should stop writing. Keep doing what you're doing." So that was really encouraging. So all that to say, I do have a blog. It's called graceforchristians.com. So that's, I'm not going to spell it all out, but it's Grace for Christians, but the 4 is a number 4. Graceforchristians.com. I have 3 pieces on there so far. And the one I'm working on right now is, it's not up yet, but I'll just give a teaser. It's called Talk to My Attorney. That's the one that will be up shortly, but I have three pieces, and one of them is the King's Table, which we've talked about before.
And I would encourage you guys to go check that blog out. And Joy does an excellent job of painting a picture. And I told her the other day, it was like, oh, these 4 sentences are the best sentences on the internet. So very good articles over there at graceforchristians.com. Okay, let's move into the last section. I learned a lot in this one.
Oh, yes, I did too.
I really think Larry did an excellent job of explaining this. Relatively speaking, I was alive because I just understood what he meant. Oh yeah, you think you're doing okay, and then the Holy Spirit comes in and reveals that you're not. And I really liked what he said about the little man. I don't remember his name, but the street interviews where you have the, and there's a guy that does it now that you can go online and talk, and I don't remember his name, but he will go and he'll stop people as they're walking down the street, and he'll ask them, "Do you think you're basically a moral good person?" And all of them, yes. And then he just takes them to the 10 Commandments, and you see the conviction, and you see, oh, wait a second, I'm not. That was really good. But this, relatively speaking, was very good. And the other thing that was interesting that I learned was that these Pharisees, wasn't it really good when he said, the Pharisees, nobody had any trouble with the Pharisees until Jesus came, said, and turned those Pharisees into the awful people that they already were, but he revealed who they were.
Right.
But these Pharisees, we on this side of the cross, we think Pharisees, everybody knows a Pharisee is a bad person because Jesus. But at the time, the Pharisees were the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Moore, or
right.
These are the people that have the influence and seem to have their life together and are very pious. Those are the kind of people Jesus was talking about, not like these evil little scheming devils who pretended. No, they really were. They really were pious. They really, and today they really are. They really do have a heart. They think they're doing good, but they're not. But that was good.
Yeah, I think I don't have much to say on that, because I learned all the things that you learned, that just that explanation of I was once alive and then the law came in. That, just like I said before, that's always confused me. I don't know why I apparently just missed that. I was in the audience when he was giving this lesson. Obviously, I guess I just forgot it.
So, listeners, Joy doesn't know I'm going to do this, but
Oh.
Joy wrote a alternate version of Trust and Obey several years ago. And I want to read you these words as we finish up here. And before I do, let me remind you guys to please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment on anything that you find edifying. We would very much appreciate that. You can also find us on Facebook at the Timeless Gospel Podcast. That's the name of the Facebook page. Or you can email us at thetimelessgospel@gmail.com. Oh, and our poll, we did a vote on the songs, and it was neck and neck between He Hideth My Soul and Can It Be? So we're going to play both of them for this
Nice.
episode. Okay, Larry talked about, and I wrote, now, therefore, if. And he said there would be nothing wrong with the song Trust and Obey if they said, if you can trust and obey, you can be happy in Jesus. So I found this a few months ago. I found these words that you wrote, Joy. So she wrote an alternate words to the hymn Trust and Obey. And this will be what we end with. Do you have anything you want to say before I read this?
No, I didn't know you were going to do this.
I know.
I do remember this was a long time ago that I did this, and I remember me and you trying to sing this for Dad, like to show him. We got through the first 3 lines, I think, and we just started crying, like we couldn't finish it.
Yep.
Aww.
Yep. Okay. From the rise of the sun to when all work is done, there is a burden we bear deep within. For his law is so clear, yet I fail even still. But my Father has dealt with my sin. Praise to the King, for this I will sing. I'm sufficient in Jesus. Oh, praise to the King. When I read his great word, all the truth can be heard. To his own sovereign grace he does give. For the souls he did choose, and my heart he renews, and decreed that in Christ I may live. Praise to the King, for this I will sing. I'm sufficient in Jesus. Oh, praise to the King. My sin is so deep, yet I am of his sheep. He will not ever cast me away. For his love does not change. His child I remain, and forever Christ lighteth my way. Praise to the King, for this I will sing. I'm sufficient in Jesus. Oh, praise to the King. Thank you for listening to the Timeless Gospel Podcast.
That's pretty good.